This is a story about death, my death, everyone's death, even yours. But it begins with only one death, the death of a man named George MacDonald, a Victorian preacher, poet, and arguably the inventor of epic fantasy as we know it. But by the late 19th century, George was dying, and he knew it. He had tuberculosis, the disease that had already taken the life of his mother, 2 of his brothers, and 3 of his own children. But his biggest fear wasn't his own death. It was what happened after. When exposed to the concepts of Calvinism, the idea that damned souls suffer forever without salvation, he wept in sorrow and in fear. Later in his life, his adoption of universalism, the idea that all human souls will eventually be saved, got him fired from his job at the church and heavy criticism from his peers. But that didn't stop him from preaching what he thought was the truth. And nearly half a lifetime later, he'd use his own imminent death and the ideas he'd learned from his troubled youth and synthesize it in the only way he knew how, storytelling. And so, in the year 1895, just a decade before his death, George MacDonald's magnum opus, Lilith, would release. Lilith feels like a book written by a man with 1 foot already in the grave. And assuming we're not counting Shelley or any of the Gothics as epic fantasy, which I do not, Lilith, in my opinion, becomes the first of a new kind of fantasy, dark fantasy. You've probably seen the dark fantasy TikToks. And like many, even myself, you may have believed this nostalgic genre of fantasy harked back to Conan, Thomas Covenant, Pan's Labyrinth, and more. And so imagine my shock when I discovered a Victorian fantasy written before fucking Wizard of Oz that dealt with themes of death, judgment, damnation, and salvation. I've got over 500 fantasy books in my Great Fantasy Reading Challenge, but I truly did not expect something so badass and hardcore as Lilith this early. Certainly not in the Bronze Age era of fantasy. The story of Lilith is one every fantasy fan should know and attempt to understand. And so in this video, we're going to talk about the prose, the world, the characters, the plot, the themes, and the novel's mysterious twist ending. But first, we must start at the beginning, in an old haunted library, where one man's life and death will change forever. It's certainly telling that Mr. Vane, a man interested in science and how the world really works, is the one tipped to embark on this spiritual, dreamlike journey. An orphan since childhood, he has now inherited his family's estate and the magnificent library inside. Hunting truth in all things, he spends every day reading obsessively. But as you might expect, on one of those days, something that defies truth occurs. Because at the end of the hall, Vane sees a man reaching up and taking a book. A guest? A thief, even? Not entirely, because just as quickly as the figure is spotted, Vane blinks and the apparition is gone. He of course concludes he must just be seeing things, but when he goes up to the spot where the ghost was, he sees one of the books has been taken from its place. Over the next few days, the hunt for this apparition nearly drives Vane mad. He sees the ghost again and again, but can never catch him. Frustrated and confused, Vane eventually questions the butler of the estate, who confirms that the house was believed to be haunted by an old man, a man he names as Mr. Raven. The next time he sees the ghost, Vane doesn't chase, he follows. And the ghastly Mr. Raven leads him up the staircases into rooms of the house he didn't even know existed. One of these rooms is small, dimly lit, but in its center is an old mirror, one that does not reflect outward, but inward, into another world entire. Think Through the Looking Glass from Lewis Carroll. We get our first glimpse here of the world beyond. Desolate, alien, a land of low hills and faraway mountains. This is surely how the ghost has been getting in and out of the estate. And this is confirmed when Vane sees a large raven stood upright like a man, staring at him through the mirror and slowly walking towards him. It's a strikingly chilling scene, one that affects Vane as equally hard, for he, transfixed, falls through the glass and into the mirror world. It's a very compelling opening. One part haunted house story, one part trippy portal fantasy. I immediately think back to Fantasties, George MacDonald's first work and the first book I read on this Great Fantasy Reading Challenge, because they share a similar library setting, portal fantasy mechanics, and both begin with a fantastical messenger come to spark the journey. But Lilith's intro is much better in my opinion. There's a gothic, bleak energy to it all that you just want to soak up. And by the tightening of the tension and the mystery that occurs all the way to the final pages, the opening feels much more intentional and artfully designed than most. Except even a few chapters in, the first real hurdle you'll have to get through is becoming increasingly apparent: the prose. It's not that MacDonald is a poor writer. I'd say since Fantasties he's gotten rid of many of his worst choices, such as all the dreadful songs and long chapter epigraphs. But while Fantasties was difficult to read because it was dry, Lilith is even more difficult because it's so dense. And you might be saying, John, I've read Wheel of Time or Malazan. This Victorian fantasy meant for children can't be too difficult. Well, let's see if it all comes so easy to you after we're done explaining this opening dialogue scene. Because the first and arguably biggest test of patience in the whole book happens right here, as Vane enters the mirror world and is spoken to by the raven man ghost thing. Despite knowing it's absurd, Vane asks this raven how he got in. And the raven somehow responds, saying he of course came through the door. But Vane says he came through a mirror and didn't see any door. And the raven responds with, "Of course not," he returned. "All the doors you have yet seen, and you haven't seen many, were doors in. Here you came upon a door out. The strange thing to you will be that the more doors you get out of, the farther you get in." Oh, brother, that's right. Lilith is one of these books, isn't it? It's like reading Alice in Wonderland if it was Goth and emo. All of these conversations between Vane and the Raven, and yes, they will have many of them, are what make this book so difficult to piece for first-time readers. Add that to the fact that the story isn't clear about what's a dream and what's reality. Every single character in this book having two physical manifestations, like how Mr. Raven is both a raven and an old man, and Vane for some reason calling the sun and the moon by human pronouns for like no reason.
Luna, do you have time to sing a goodbye song before you go? Always bear.
And you've got a story that just refuses to make things easy. However, I want to assure you that eventually all of this makes sense. It's not just philosophizing for no reason. It's secretly priming your subconscious for the story's biggest questions. And these themes are properly introduced when the Raven brings Vane back to his home. Home? No, nothing so cozy in this world. Instead of a home, the Raven lives inside a cemetery. He claims to be working as a sexton, a keeper of the dead. And this is really where I begin to understand and look forward to one of the mysteries that will be revealed later in the story. The secret of the Raven's identity.
Wait a minute!
Mrs. Raven asks her husband if Vane will sleep. Vane doesn't understand. He says surely a man must do some kind of work and labor before winding down. But the woman says he does not know that the day begins with sleep. Tell him he must rest before he can do anything. And it's pretty clear that she isn't just talking about sleep like Vane thinks she is. When Vane asks if he can be put to sleep, the Raven says only if he can choose to sleep without knowing whether or not he will wake. Vane, curious but not yet convinced, says he will, and the Raven takes him down to the cemetery. And it's here we get one of the best scenes in the entire novel. Because the cemetery is ominous and frightening to behold, and filling it is row upon row of veiled dead, lined up endlessly on stone slabs. The moon shines in, revealing the dead's faces, and Vane sees that they are not dead, not truly. Instead, they are sleeping halfway between death and life, caught in a terrible stagnation of semi-consciousness. The Raven claims that they're not dying, they're healing, and he points to an empty bed and tells Vane that this one is reserved for him. And man, the horror vibes are strong in this scene. A cemetery filled with half-dead souls, a mysterious raven shouting philosophies of death and judgment. It all gets a little bit too much for Vane, who, in an act that will define the rest of his adventure, refuses the sleep. It's a chilling scene, regardless if you know the fact that the Raven doesn't just equal evil. The prose really shine when MacDonald lets it become cinematic like this, rather than trying its hardest to give the reader a headache. But I cannot honestly judge it too harshly. I think MacDonald delivers everything he wants to with his prose. He knows when he's being confusing, knows when nothing makes sense, but also knows when to hit the reader with something profound and something disturbing. And in Lilith, he flexes this dark fantasy muscle more than any of his books combined. And much of it, the horror, the bleakness, but also the whimsy he's known for, shows up most clearly in his world building. As Vane walks through the mirror world after his refusal of the sleep, we begin to see just how committed MacDonald is to this nightmare aesthetic. Beneath the ground, monsters writhe and burrow. Some are grotesque. Some are overwhelmingly beautiful, but all are terrifying and dangerous. There are so many moments of monstrous visions like this in the book, and one of my favorites happens as he enters the evil wood and goes to sleep. Regular sleep, I feel like I have to say. Because when he wakes, he witnesses an army of skeletons at war, a battle of the dead right before his eyes. And we learn this is what happens to people who refuse the rest. Souls forever damned to fight and burn and die in an endless cycle.
Hardcore, man.
At least that's what Vane perceives it to be. As for me, I honestly can't say. Like much of this book, my thoughts are ever changing. One thing I can be certain of is that this world MacDonald throws us into refuses to be simple, and always has another surprise up its sleeve. The best one coming in a form of innocence and whimsy rather than darkness. Because Vane goes through an evil wood and gets caught by a group of giants. But while imprisoned, he ends up getting saved by this odd little group of people. They're called the Little Ones. They appear kind of like children and are pure innocence and whimsy and like fun all put into one kind of group. The Little Ones love Vane, and Vane loves them too. They're kind of impossible not to love, to be honest. Vane meets with Lona, the leader of the Little Ones. She explains that these giants who are greedy and dumb and ugly or whatever, they actually come from the Little Ones, not the other way around. The Little Ones change into these giants, and worst of all, become forgetful. Once they've grown, they don't remember they used to be little ones. She explains this by showing Vane one of the little boys who she thinks is going to turn into a giant. He's starting not to share his fruit. He's starting to become a bit of an isolationist. Like, that's just the signs that they have that they're going to change. She says once the process begins, there is no way to stop it. And the next day, the boy wakes up a giant, totally having forgotten who he once was. It's an incredible story, like, that actually kind of gets you a little bit emotional in the scene, but is also just an excellent commentary on things like growing up and maturity and losing your innocence. This blend of dark fantasy and whimsy is the perfect mixture of George MacDonald's strengths. It keeps his children fantasy roots kind of there at the forefront, but also adding in this incredible nightmare-fueled world. The world is so strange and unique. Time and place are deemed useless. They're not even counted. Vane often forgets his own identity. It's like you can't hold on to your own personal memories in this world. The Raven's Cemetery is said to exist in all seasons at once, like spring, summer, autumn, winter, all kind of at the same time. Like, don't ask me to show an image of that. I have no idea what it looks like. But it's just another piece of this incredible dreamlike atmosphere. This absurdist, grimdark, horror vibes, biblical references, fantasy monsters, science fiction, metaphysics, but like with fairy children in it too. Like, I don't know, man, it's just so interesting. The world is maybe the most impressive thing about Lilith, though its characters certainly give it a run for its money. Besides refusing the sleep, the first real character choice we see Vane make is leaving the Little Ones. He loves the Little Ones more than anything, and wishes to find a way to help them. But the Little Ones don't really seem to have any problems, at least none that they couldn't handle themselves. So he decides to leave, in search for some way to help the Little Ones, perhaps against their giant problem. The important thing is that he chooses to leave innocence and bliss, because he believes there must be something he has to do in this world. It's probably the one defining flaw Vane has in the story, and one that will lead him and the Little Ones into danger and death, and not the sleepy kind either. But before he goes, the Little Ones warn him about a dangerous woman in the forest, someone they call the Catwoman.
Meow.
Well, maybe a little bit different than that. She's called the Catwoman because she owns 2 great cats, and because the Little Ones don't trust her, thinking she'll cut them with her concealed claws. But when Vane first meets her, we learn appearances don't always match. The Catwoman is always veiled, and at first kind of looks a bit suspicious, but eventually we learn her real name, which is Mara. She's kind of like a guardian spirit, an angel of mercy and repentance. And this whole segment with her is the classic example of don't judge a book by its cover, I think. And instead, almost a few chapters after, Vane finds the real big bad of the story and of course falls in love with her. Because as Vane is heading through the forest, he finds the body of a beautiful woman, cold, almost dead. And Vane tries his best to heal this woman. He's really like torn up about it. He dreams that maybe she will wake and maybe they will be together. You know, classic. But when she wakes, she's far less than grateful. In fact, she is the epitome of evil. She's Lilith. And this is where the book subtly changes, because it's the first open time it reveals that it has characters from actual biblical myth. She is the first wife of Adam. The story is that she refused to be with Adam and refused to obey God. She thinks to exist under another's judgment is to be ruled like a slave. So instead, she rules her own land, a city called Bulika, a place of greed and violence, and Lilith as the tyrant queen. And I've been reading a lot of seductress women of late. Aisha and the Fair Lady from Would Beyond the World. And I'd say Lilith is probably straight in the middle for my enjoyment. What she lacks in Aisha's personality, she makes up for, though, in threat. Because it's revealed she's not only a tyrant, she's a murderer of the highest order. Because when Vane gets to Bulika, he learns that there are no babies in the city, because Lilith hunts and kills them. And this, of course, makes Vane fear for the little ones. And after some shenanigans, of a couple chapters, he decides to return to them. I'd honestly say the characters in this story are really compelling, with Lona, the little one, and Lilith being the two best, besides one other man, the Raven. And this is where we get the bombshell secret revealed about the Raven's identity. Because it turns out the Raven is Adam, from Adam and Eve, from the Genesis. And this adds a huge dynamic between him and Lilith, of course, hyping up for when they finally meet. But before that day can happen, McDonald steps into sport mode, and the main plot of Lilith truly kicks in. Holy shit, dude, it's fucking hot in here. Lilith is one of those books that feels like it finds the story it wants to tell halfway in. And while I personally don't agree, because I think the opening half lays the groundwork for what's to come really well, I can at least understand the feeling. Because after this point, the pace of the book just suddenly snaps into full gear like whiplash. The book finally comes in with some epic fantasy action, and it does so without ever forgetting its intention and the themes. Vane returns to the little ones, and there he sees Lona. And after seeing the Princess Lilith, he actually realizes something quite disturbing. Lona is the daughter of Lilith. And if Lilith could find Lona, she would 100% kill her. Same for probably all the little ones. And Vane cannot have that happen, so he plans something immense. Something that's actually quite more than I thought this book was going to get into. He plans to take the little ones to Bulika and overthrow Lilith, setting Lona on the throne. That way, the little ones can always be safe. But more personally, it's also so he can feel fully content that he's fulfilled a great mission here in this mirror world like he's been trying to do the whole book. And so, in a kind of half hilarious chapter, Vane turns the little ones into soldiers. They defeat the giants of the wood first with ease, and then finally head over to Bulika. And the entrance is pure fantasy spectacle. The little ones ride elephants and bears, and even a leopard later on, and they ride into the city in search of new mothers, ones who won't abandon them. When they enter Bulika, one of the little boys hugs one of the evil giants, thinking it his mother, and is instead attacked. And this is where the conflict and the battle first ensues. Deaths occur, and eventually Lona says that it is hopeless, that there are no new mothers here. Well, all except one. It's no Helm's Deep, of course, but the Battle of Bulika succeeds more than it does fail. It's less about the tension and more about the emotion of watching a people as innocent as the little ones react to murder and carnage and even engage in it themselves. It's hard to watch sometimes, and honestly gets a whole lot harder as Lilith enters the scene. Lona wants to leave, but Vane says they shouldn't, for he hopes maybe the sight of Lona could move Lilith's heart to goodness.
What a bad idea.
Again, this is all tied to Vane's belief that he has to do something monumental in this world, despite everything that the Raven has said to him. And so they go, and they meet Lilith in her palace. Vane sees that half the princess's body is overtaken by the Shadow, a dark presence that has followed Vane throughout the story. But Lona doesn't see the Shadow. She only sees the other half, a face of beauty and loveliness. And Lona runs to her, calling out for her mother. And before Vane can stop it, Lilith grabs Lona and throws her against the wall. Lona's death marks the tragic end to the war arc of this story. I mean, I'm still surprised we had a war arc in this story, but I'm glad we did because it was really good. We've watched the little ones lose their leader, their home, and their innocence. And two people are to blame. Lilith, of course, and Vane. He knows that he has failed, that he has caused Lona's death, but he knows now that there's only one way he and Lilith herself can be saved. The thing he first refused, the sleep. The climax of this story is where the themes of universalism, death, and mercy all come to a front. Vane and the little ones transport the captured Lilith and the body of Lona to the Catwoman, who attempts to convince Lilith to repent. The transfer of Lilith is not very easy. She bites, refuses food, hardly sleeps, and just makes the journey really difficult. She begs Vane in fear to send her away, for she knows she'll be taken to Adam. At the Catwoman's house, the little ones are afraid, but learn that Lady Mara is good, even if she sometimes may hurt. She kind of represents that saying that a true friend will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. The little ones, despite all that Lilith has done to hurt them, are afraid, for they don't want the Catwoman to scratch her. I love the innocence the little ones bring to this story. It's impossible not to love them and to feel bad for them. But Vane chooses to enter the room and to see the torture happen in the flesh. He waits for most of the night for it to begin, hanging in suspense and shame for all the things that he's done. And it's difficult to say whether Vane really deserves it. None of his actions were for vile reasons, like Lilith's were. Holy shit, guys. Eventually, Mara, the Catwoman, comes in, and this time unveils her face. He expects a face of vengeance, of a justified hatred for Lilith, but instead Mara's face is one of sorrow. And perhaps in one of the bigger turn of events, Mara doesn't go to Lilith in search of punishment, but with a plea for repentance. Will you turn away from the wicked things you have been doing so long? I will not, she said. I will be myself and not another. Alas, you are another now, not yourself. Will you not be your real self? If you were restored, would you not make what amends you could for the misery you have caused? I would do after my nature. You do not know it. Your nature is good, and you do evil. You have killed your daughter, Lilith. I have killed thousands. She is my own. She was never yours as you are another's. I am not another's. I am my own, and my daughter is mine. Then alas, your hour has come. The back and forth really reveals Mara's patience and her true sorrow at what Lilith has become. I mean, she kind of sounds like a sister talking to another castaway sibling. And their conversation strikes at the very heart of the novel, and the debate that left a young George MacDonald in tears. Can an evil soul ever be saved? This is truly the question the entire novel has been circulating. We've seen the skeleton armies, the little ones, and their giant counterparts, and the half-dead souls sleeping in their beds of stone. George MacDonald uses Lilith to represent man's desire to be free, to have complete autonomy over their own lives, the resistance to submit to any kind of higher power. Like almost every George MacDonald work, the submission and acceptance of God into your life lies at the heart of the conflict. But in this story, the trial of acceptance faces its greatest test. How can you convince someone so wicked, so addicted to their own power, to give up life itself and choose to lay down and sleep, not knowing with any certainty when or if they'll ever wake up? Even now, Lilith denies the responsibility of her own evil actions. She wants nothing more than to be her own sovereign being, even at the cost of salvation. Words fail to penetrate, and so Mara uses something else to reveal the truth to Lilith: a mirror. Once again, not a mirror to take you out, but a mirror reflected in, this time at Lilith herself. And in true dark fantasy fashion, a great red worm comes and seeps into Lilith's dark mark, and sets in motion an inner battle for the demon's soul. She is seeing herself, said Mara. She is far away from us, afar in the hell of her self-consciousness. The central fire of the universe is radiating into her the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of what she is. And in this vision, Lilith truly sees what God intended her to be. And alas, Lilith begins to see her wrongs and wishes she could be made right. But of course, she doesn't believe that she deserves this after all of the wrongs that she's done. And so the only way is to bring her to Adam, the father, whom Lilith has done the most wrong to of any creature. And there Adam will help guide her into accepting the sleep of which she dreads. But when they get to the House of the Dead, where Adam the Raven from the beginning awaits, the characters learn that Lilith is not the only one who shall be sleeping. The little ones join her in this very wholesome scene. They are so empathetic and just so innocent and kind that they don't want Lilith to wake up alone and have no one there with her. And so they too sit down in the stone beds and go to die. And Vane turns to the mother Eve and says, "One couch next to Lona is empty. I know I am unworthy, but may I not sleep this night in your chamber with my dead? Will you not pardon both my cowardice and my self-confidence and take me in?" And Eve and Adam accept, if only he accepts one last task. He must take Lilith's severed hand and bury it in the desert. He must walk alone at night without stopping, without speaking, without looking back, and without ever setting the hand down. It's one final walk of judgment for Vane, a final test of whether or not he can choose to be obedient without needing understanding, or a promise of salvation. Because that's really what true faith means. A true believer doesn't accept simply because it promises them a reward. One must accept being embraced, even when uncertain, even when unproven, even before their time is ready. This walk and the great sleep that they talk so much about in the story represent death. The death that we all must face one day. The death that George MacDonald saw barreling closer in his own life as he wrote this book. And that is what makes Lilith so significant and so personal of a story. Because all of her fears and Vane's desire to do more with the time that he has are all lingering questions we shall have in the moment of our final hours. And truthfully, most of us will never get the chance to have any of them answered. But that's the whole point. Now, this ending sequence kind of gets a bit convoluted. Scenes where he's dead, but isn't dead. Scenes where he's awake, but isn't awake. But the one I really want to talk about is the final sequence, where Vane wakes and beside him is Lona, now a fully grown woman. Upon waking, he and Lona, along with the little ones, head outside. And they see that the dark world that they used to roam through has changed. The monsters are drowned away. The sky is nice and beautiful. Everything is revived back to the way it should have been. Just kind of like Lilith was. The sequence is written like a walk through the afterlife, or even heaven itself. And it's one of the most fascinating and almost ambitious endings that I've read for any book on this Great Fantasy Reading Challenge. Like at the beginning, I first was wondering, does this really ever need to be here? The book's kind of done, the climax has kind of happened. But by the end of it, I start to see the intention. The little ones see a beautiful city rising high, replacing what was once Bulika. And almost as if it is heaven itself, a literal guardian angel gives them a tour through the city. The little ones find their mothers at last, and Lona and Vane walk alone up a mountain. And at the top of the mountain, Vane sees a singular door waiting for him. And he feels, like the hand of God himself, something pushing him towards the door. He heads towards the door, compelled but uncertain. As he stands at the foot of it, questioning if he should go, whether or not he has proof he'll ever come back. But this time, the gentle hand gives him a little help, nudging him through. And Vane falls in, falling, and waking up back into his library. And this kind of twist ending, going back to where you started at the beginning, very Hero's Journey-esque, it actually just recontextualizes everything about this book, all the way down to even the most central of themes. Because in the final chapter, the Endless Ending it's called, Vane reveals that he is back in the regular world, alone, with no sign of the ravens, of Lona, of Lilith, or the little ones. And of course, he asks the obvious question, did any of this actually happen? But I think that's intentionally put in there as kind of a nod to the reader and isn't really the question you should be asking. Because with Vane back in the real world, with all the lessons he has learned, he gets to do something that very few other people get to do. He gets to live knowing what it's like to die. And not like the sensation of what it's like to die, but truly what it means to give up and accept your death as something natural and not something scary that you should run from. It's like such an emotionally poignant ending to me, because the lesson at the end of this book isn't something overly profound or overly, heroic. Like, this isn't a heroic epic fantasy. This is not telling you that you gotta save the world, that you should try in your life to do great things. It's actually kind of telling you the opposite. Because the real message of the story is live as fully and as peacefully as you can. And when death comes, as it will for all of us, don't regret all the bad things you've done or the great tasks you never completed. Accept death like a gentle hand pushing you through another door. A calm sleep like a gentle dream. Because yes, death can be scary sometimes, but you don't actually have to fear it. Sometimes that misery is all just in your mind. So yeah, guys, 1895's Lilith. This book, put simply, is fire. Like, in this entire book, right, we go on such an adventure with so many great themes involved, and there's so many things that I didn't even get to in this video. It was too long. Those are the hidden gems I will leave with you to go find yourself, because all the things that we did see are just incredible. The House of Death, Adam personified as a raven, the harbinger of death in most other stories. The little ones and their tale of growing up. The repentance of Lilith and Vane's walk of judgment. And that ending, man, what a perfect ending for this book. It's one of those endings that just kind of elevates everything in the story and, makes like a blurry image crystal clear in your mind. That was not a good enough snap here. Crystal clear in your mind. Of course, it's not a perfect book. It is slower at times. It's overly confusing, I think, and frustratingly difficult. I mean, again, I had to reread this opening like 4 or 5 times just to understand the characters. But maybe that makes sense because it's also a book I've never read anything like before. I feel as if I only understand about half of it still, and will certainly need multiple rereads to grasp all the nuance, all the themes, all the meanings. Like every chapter is full of just this old man's lessons to the world. It feels like that was the point of this book. He was writing it knowing he was going to die, and then you just got this whole book full of wisdom. Lilith is one of the fantasy genre's greatest onions, in my opinion.
Layer upon layer upon layer.
A total diamond in the rough that has just been forgotten by modern fantasy fans. You know, Christian book readers pick it up occasionally, but this needs to be on more people's TBRs. Because books that leave you contemplating every choice you make in life, even down to the final hours right before your death, are very few and far between. Is it a perfect book? No, I certainly have my problems with it. But for its ambition, for its emotion, and for the themes that just stick in your mind so well, I am giving Lilith 8.0 out of 10. That's right, the first 5-star book on my Great Fantasy Reading Challenge. And man, I did not expect it, honestly. Like, when picking up this book, there was no indication that this one was going to be the one for me. So, what do you think? Lilith was a phenomenal addition, not just to Bronze Age fantasy, but to the entire Great Fantasy Reading Challenge as a whole. If you don't know, the Great Fantasy Reading Challenge is where I attempt to read every single major fantasy book in chronological order. For my next book, we're back to William Morris. Oh man. But for now, like and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Ciao.